So can I start to do it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So the measuring social worker bias in the child welfare system. And so before I jump into my topic, I want to give a more explicit example. So you might see this kind of survey item. I agree with the current gun control policy. Mm-hmm. For example, George is a respondent who has like conservative stance, and he believes like the gun should not be controlled in principle according to the Constitution. In contrast, Alice has a progressive educator, and she believes like a series of firearm accidents are considered a serious social problem. So she believes that nation must manage firearms more thoroughly. But even though they have totally different opinions, when they actually respond to the survey item, I agree with the gun control policy, they strongly disagree with the two different reasons. And the subjective reactions to this survey item are on opposite sides with the two different directions, which are located farther from the one ideal point. So in this case, the survey analysis does not capture the nuance at all in the two different respondents who have, kind of opposite ideas. So both observations indicate strong, extreme, or negative on the given item. So my problem is about this kind of value-related survey item. So this is not gonna working with like 5-point Likert scale, and then we kind of sum them up. We have done that so far, but that is not the way we need to analyze it, especially related to this kind of value policy. So now, social worker decision is like, for example, I brought this quote from somebody else here, Chimners et al. And Roberts. So they said, children of color are more likely to be placed in foster care than in-home service care, even when they have the same level of risky behaviors as the reference group children in the U.S. So here, reference group is a white group, and I'm not interested in whether it is true or not. This quote has at least two assumptions. First one is the child who has a high risk behavior score is likely to be assigned to foster care. That's number one assumption in this quote. And second one is, regardless of the behavior score, the children of color are more likely to be assigned in foster care to foster care service. So if these two assumptions, my focus is to see if it really is and how to find that out. So here two classifications, foster care and in-home care. So one thing is regarded as a treatment group, and the other is like control group. Yeah, there are more different service care, but to avoid the complexity, I just put two things only in this study. So I mentioned the risk behavior score. So it's kind of continuous score. So with a certain threshold, cut point, some children are assigned to foster care, and the others are assigned in in-home care service. So here, let's say the one who has a very, high risk scores, and they are assigned to foster care, and the rest of them are assigned to in-home care. But that's not it. There are other discretions, like social workers or administrator or other policymakers, and who see all kinds of financial restrictions or environmental changes, they have discretion to override the original assignment. So for example, the child who is originally assigned in in-home care can be overridden to foster care by the worker's decision. So in this case, the person has a professional knowledge, so we don't necessarily say that is a bias-oriented decision. Well, but the kid is not just simply or randomly overridden to either care. There are certain kids who are more often overridden than the others. For example, this is a model for override function. For example, let's say this is the standardized risk score on x-axis, and the central cut point is threshold. So the one are like good kids are assigned here and bad kids are assigned here. So let's say the one who has a higher cut point is assigned to, let's say, in-home care, and the other side is foster care. So the override decision is on around the cut point. So let's say you have like only 2 ranks in your grading system, for example. The one who is really good, you are not likely override the one to the lower grade, right? But the one who has like around the cut score can be overridden to either way, right? If you have like a certain principle for the kids who are supposed to have A's or B's or F's, then let's say you have too small number of A's, but in that case, you're really tempted to override the ones who are located B's to move up, to A, right? Just like that. So override does not happen randomly. Override happens around the cut score all the time. So in this case, we have only 2 classes, 2 classifications, 2 service care. So we just have only 1 cut score. So let's expand, or let's generalize this to like 5 Likert scale. In that case, we have 5 different choices. So that means we have like 4 cut points. So we can generalize that decision into this multiple, options. But anyway, this is very kind of, starting study. So I just want to simplify this scenario. So anyway, so worker decision does not occur randomly. Okay, so my goal of study is to simulate worker override decision on care service placement. And research question is, what is the impact of care services with or without worker override on the estimation of each service care effect? So most of empirical studies goal is like study 1. They want to know the impact of a certain policy intervention or a certain service on the outcome. In this simulation study, my goal is the impact of selection bias, whatever it is called here, override, on the outcome estimation, not just the outcome. So what I'm going to do is the model without override. So we just assign the children to 2 different care service with only based upon the risk score method. So we assume there is no override, and then we get the outcome estimate. And then the next model is we systemically include percentage of override. Then the percentage of override will affect the estimation of the outcome. Then that is the amount of the bias on the outcome. So what we're going to do is compare those different models. So why this is important is we have a lot of confounding factors, selection bias in every observational study. If it is not an experimental design, we always have selection bias. But how can we model the selection bias? We kind of have not thought about it very well. We just collect the data based on our best knowledge. We try to get the representative data, even though it is local data, and we try to get a representative subset of population, which is a sample. But we cannot avoid the selection bias. And parametric analysis, we always assume there is somewhere out there on the true value, unobserved true value, which is population parameters. They are always there, but we do not know actually. But anyway, if we use this kind of simulation approach, we can compare the outcome estimate without confounding factor and outcome estimate with the confounding factor. That's my approach here. So comparison, simply method is a comparison between the estimates of algorithm models outcome and the non-algorithm model outcome. But how can we do it? How can one single kid can be assigned two different service cares at the same time? So it's not possible in empirical studies because, I'm a Solomon. I'm kind of cut one person into two pieces. And then at the same time, I just assign one half to this care service. And then I put the other half to the other care service. And then after a certain time, we want to see the care service effect and then compare that, right? But we cannot do it. So what I'm going to do is I give the distribution, then I generate the data based on the distribution, and I assign one person two different simulation conditions. Then I estimate the parameter. Then I compare those two biases. That's what I'm trying to do. So how can we generate the data then? First, we want to know the nature of the override, how the override is modeled. That is here. So according to these people, so like, for example, this is explicit case gun control policy. So George is around here, maybe. Alice is around here. They are kind of strongly disagree people, but they happen to show their one observed response to the survey item. So here, moderate person. So let's say this is the ideal point, even though it doesn't mean ideal. And George is here, Alice is here. So let me read this one. So higher level of individual disagreement to the location of the response category, the greater the probability of an extreme response on both sides. And here, the people who have like whatever people, I don't care people, they are moderate opinions are around the ideal point, while extremely negative opinions are far away from the center regardless of the direction. Likewise, the override decision happen around the threshold, and the one who has really high risk behavior, then they are here, and the one who are really good kid, I mean, I said opposite way, so the really good kid is around here, really bad kid is around here. So this looks like a normal distribution, but it's not. Normal distribution maximum is 0.4, but this is 0.5. So this means this is a student or child behavior score, standardized score. And this is probability density function like a normal distribution, but it's not the normal distribution though. So the override maximum probability is 0.5. So 0.5 means the risk score method the continuous score method, cut point method, is still main principle that the child is decided which care service. Okay, so this is given from these people. So I simply use this formula to generate override. So first, I make the student or child scores at time point 1 based upon their risk behavior. Like, for example, one kid beat them up somebody else, and then the worker gave like penalty -point, and one kid lie, or they give like a -1 point weight, something like that. So they made the composite score as one single continuous score. So the higher or lower child observed score, behavior score is, the less the worker feels the need to override, and override probability decreases. If the child is far away from the core score in either direction, either good or either bad, then the worker is unlikely to be override, and it is also harder for the worker to justify as override in this case. Really good kid, really bad kid. Since this is a probability, it's not impossible to not to override the kids. It still happens based on this little probability. This is a probability. So I'm just talking about probability. So significance of this study is that there's no systemic research exists to estimate resulting bias in the care intervention so far, depending on the measurement error, by adapting override probability unfolding model. So I missed one thing. So this is not cumulative function like regular IRT latent trait model. This is like unfolding model. And government authorities must know the care service effects across the different score ranges by using all levels of children, then only kids near the cut point. So I search unfolding model is used in our field. There's none. I haven't found out any unfolding model application paper, but I found out some election paper in political science and also turnover rate in job market in business administration. So if we have this agenda like a gun control policy or decision making, we shouldn't use monotonically increasing function like a 5-point Likert scale. Sum them up. It's not working. Yeah. So I try to, this is kind of pedagogical purpose also. So depending on what question the researchers are asking about, we have to use a different modeling approach, not necessarily, survey the IRT model, item response theory model. So, okay, so far, do you have any questions?
I do a couple things. So this is very interesting, by the way. I think your framing of this is really what's going to be important here. And so I would suggest somehow first in the beginning to describe the problems with, whether we call it select, it's really a combination of selection bias and measurement error, right? And in that first instance, when you gave the gun policy, it often occurs where we have to analyze data that others have generated and we don't get to craft the questions. And in these cases, you have to kind of deal with that bias, right?
Right.
And in other cases, you have the issue of like I think the A, B, C that the grading. That's also another thing I think that resonates in terms of understanding while that kind of discretion is utilized sometimes. But I think obviously grades are important. Obviously the policy is important, but there are some real world implications. For instance, in the selection of foster care, where a yes or a no is really a problem, right? It has very drastic, severe, right? So sometimes yes, no, 0 is not enough, right? Membership, not membership. And in these severe cases, it's very, very important to deal with the selection bias, right? That kind of, so the other thing I think you want to do, so really kind of describing this a little bit with those stories up front, I think would be important. But I think your contribution here is beyond that too, in that first you're proving that bias, right? You're showing that, and that it's near the cut score, right?
Right.
So I think that's and I don't know of the other ways to do it, but I think what you have to do is describe, there are a number of ways to do this, and you are going to show how to do it, right? And what other, number of ways to deal with measurement error or bias. Why is your way better? Or if not better, this is one way to handle it. You can talk about it in that way. You don't have to talk about something as being superior, but often this is an overlooked approach, perhaps you could say, right?
Oh, yes.
Not, So I kind of think framing that up front is going to be interesting. But now there are some, although obviously we really want the focus to be on the process and the methodological approach, et cetera, and the value of that. I do think in terms of kind of selling the idea, if you will, that the use of discretion is really important, right? And it is a matter of importance to political science. That's really kind of what principal agent theory is. Did we carry out a policy as expected, or did we override? Now, I guess I'm a little bit unclear about the override. I suspect there's parameters, right, to determine. I shouldn't use the word. There are ways to determine whether or not this child could be in foster care that are somewhere on paper, right? There's some approach and attempt to be objective. Under what conditions can that discretion actually be exercised?
So the policy does not exist in the policy has a lot of context. So, it's not just the universal policy. So the people who apply the policy to real cases, they have to think about a lot of environmental restrictions, and they have to think about budgets. And, even though they want to, assign the kid to in-home service, if they do not have enough number of in-home services, they cannot do it. So regardless of the cut point, they have to use their discretion more in that case. So I think if I talk about discretion more than the modeling rule, that paper might be kind of a normative paper. So I try to simply make it like more methodological approach. So maybe I could use discretion. I'm not talking about making a whole lot of it discretion, but I'm just thinking in terms of there are really good reasons to understand this, and it's a topic of, and so whether it's a few sentences, I think your initial thoughts on this is right. We want to make it more about the modeling approach. That's all.
Yeah. Just let me jump in real quick. Deanna covered most of this, but I think I just would like to reiterate the point that the way that you talk about this is really important. Obviously, this is well within scope of what we're looking for. We want you to submit this. I think it's just framing, right? You setting the stage for why this is an important tool for people in public administration and management, the kind of questions we ask, the kind of data we collect, are vulnerable to these types of problems. Mm-hmm. And you have a solution for that vulnerability. And just sort of flipping I guess what I'm worried about, or I would like to see, is that, you really sort of front load that, and that the application is, it's important. It's important, but it's less important than describing sort of the method itself, right? That's been the point of the special issue. It's just like, can we find or put together a collection of tools that would be useful to our fellow scholars, that would help them address potential problems in our research in public management. And I think this fits perfectly. Actually, I think it's really good, and I think it's useful. It's just what I don't want to see is just a paper that could have been submitted to anywhere where you're using this technique, You know what I mean? And it's just, and that's great. And you highlight it in the middle of the paper that this is why you're using this methodological approach because of measurement error and selection bias. We want you to move that stuff up front and that be the driving force behind the manuscript.
I see. Yeah. I will. Yeah. So storytelling about this is really important. So the audience, I try to make sure our audience understand why this new approach isn't necessary in our field. And people just want to know the policy outcome quickly, but that's not my point. And we have more methodological approaches, but we are somehow kind of restricted in some streams or mainstreams of the methods. And then I think instead of overwhelming the audience with the too technical things, I just want to let them know the significance of this method and what policy scenarios can be, more developed in this way. Yeah, so this is just very kind of beginning level study. And and also what I'm trying to say is that nowadays our society is very into the race ethnicity problem. But what I'm trying to say is, even though the social welfare worker does not have race-related bias, as long as we have like a classification, there is a cut point, and then around the cut point, there is like a non-random selection bias there. So we might neglect that point. So I try to bring up that issue. Also, in addition to that kind of broad function, if I add more vector of covariates, such as race or other kind of things, then, that is another one. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really good. I think, I guess practical question, like how much more time do you need before you can submit it?
I